Thanks, Tab. Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many of you here. So the structure of this will be it's a 25 minutes breakout. So I'll give my presentation, and I hope we'll have some time for questions at the end. So please use the raise hand feature. I'll stop midstream if I want to, or we'll wait until the end. We'll see. All right, let's dive into it. So what's this then? Interop 2023 is about making the web more interoperable in key areas. And we prioritize by mainly web developer, but also user needs. It's part of the web platform test project, and it's formed of browser vendors and others who contribute to the web platform. Here's what we'll cover today. First, I want to zoom out a bit and talk about web developer needs more generally, about what's going on with Interop 2022. Then we'll look at the topic of this talk, 23, and the process we're in right now. And then we will dive deep on a few things. We'll look at state of CSS results, MBM short server results, and an example, sort of tying it all together, sort of explaining how we weigh the different evidence in this process. And then finally, some time for discussion. All right, let's start with zooming out a bit. So about web developer needs. How do we know what web developers want? Well, one way that we've been doing it for a long time is by just asking them in surveys and interviews. This workstream goes back to, I would say, the first MDN web developer needs assessment survey that happened in 2019. Was the biggest sort of web developer survey at that time. Then there was a follow-up to that in 2020 called the the browser compatibility report. That's where we took a closer look at what seemed to be the top web developer pain points, namely differences between browsers or browser compatibility or interoperability, and we focused just on that. And so the findings from that led directly to an effort called Compat 2021. That in turn led to an even bigger effort that we're in right now called Interop 2022. So there's a bunch of sort of history there that I'll sort of leave there. And let's take a look at Interop 2022. So this year we have 10 focus areas that we decided on earlier this year. It's a very similar sort of prioritization process as this year, where we looked at web developer needs and so on. And we came up with 10 new focus areas that are on screen here. Since the beginning of the year, all browsers have been improving on this metric, and we're all green now, and we expect to be even better towards the end of the year. You might be wondering, like, what are the main things left for Chrome to do here, Chrome or Edge? And the three things that contribute most to the score still would be Subgrid, shipping that. It's new color spaces, and it's a few font technology CSS properties, font parent alternates and font parent, I forget the name of the second one. All right, so let's look at the Interop 2023 process instead, where we are right now. So put simply, this whole process is designed to help us identify features that matter to web developers. That's the most important thing. They need to have good tests and good specs, and we need to have consensus for these among browser vendors, which means that there are multiple parties supporting doing this, and that there's no opposition to it. This is a pretty high bar to meet. When we can't meet that bar, there's also a place for something we called investigation efforts that we did this year, and we'll probably do some next year as well. So simplifying the how do we know that something matters to web developers? There are lots of signals that we could look at. We accept any kind of evidence, really. But three that are really important is what we know from surveys, if the feature is widely used or not, and if we already know about a lot of bugs in an area. Sometimes a feature might have a lot of bugs, and we know it's important for that reason, but it still doesn't show up in surveys. That's okay, and vice versa. But these are the kinds of evidence that we're weighing together. Just quickly about what it means to be a good spec and a good test suite. For the spec side, the borrowed set is that it needs to be standards track for some definition. This means different things for different standards orgs, but the W3C is the most relevant criteria. So the most relevant here, because that's where most of the proposals are from. And there that's on the recommendation track, which you can think of basically, if it's ever been published to TR, then it's probably recommendation track. Whereas if something is only in a community group, then no. And then tests then. The way we score these efforts is by the test. So there has to be a good and healthy test suite where there's actually some tests failing in some browser for it to mean anything. So this is just a screenshot of some color tests that I took today. But that's something that is that we look a lot at when evaluating proposals. Finally, about the consensus part of this. The way it all works is that for each proposal that we have, each of the 6 organizations that participate in this take one of 3 positions. So either you say we want to include this, we don't want to include this, that is exclude, or you sort of abstain. And it's only the things that have 2 supporting organizations and no opposition that get in. So effectively, it's like everyone has a veto. This is sort of by design, so that this process can't lead to forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do, because we sort of recognize that there's no way we can force each other to do things that we really don't want to do. So this is sort of encoding that fact. So where are we with the process right now? Well, from September to October, we were accepting proposals. We got no less than 87 of them, which is terrifying and amazing. Right now, in November and December, is when everyone is reviewing these proposals, deciding if we're going to say yes or no to them, and reviewing tests, and then preparing a dashboard. So that's where we are right now. And then we'll have a public launch in January, and throughout next year, we're going to work hard and make numbers go up and to the right. All right, so now let's zoom in a bit. Let's start with state of CSS. So this is the biggest web developer survey on the topic of CSS. It just finished running for the 4th year in a row. And this year, there was a record number of survey takers, more than 14,000 from across the world. That's pretty amazing. A large part of this survey is about specific features, asking web developers which features they've heard of, which they haven't heard about, and which they've already used. So this part of the survey is a little bit like a quiz. So it's pretty fun to do. And I think this is why many developers like taking this survey and State of JS. So let's look at just what that looks like for one example. So take aspect ratio. So this property has been around for a few years now. It replaces this old hack involving extra padding that you had to use to give an element a fixed aspect ratio independent of width and height. And as you can see from these results, both awareness and usage of aspect ratio is increasing. And this matches what we see in Chrome's use kind of data, where aspect ratio usage is also going up. So it all makes sense. Another important part of State of CSS is the free form questions, where we ask developers what they think to learn what their needs are right now. Out of these, the most important one for Interop 2023 purposes is the one on browser incompatibilities, where we asked Are there any features that you have difficulties using or avoid using because of lack of support or differences between browsers? So as I said, this is a free-form question, so you could write anything you like. Let's take a look at two of the examples. So one developer said, very excited about has getting proper support, but I can't use it until it does. For container queries, someone said, I really want container queries to have more cross-browser support, but can't use them for that reason. Both of these answers are quite representative of the kinds of things people would write. And when we take all of these roughly 2,000 responses and put them in a big spreadsheet and categorize them all, we get a pretty good idea of where the hotspots are. And this is what comes out of that. So the top 10 by that method is, at the very top is the two examples I gave, has, aka parent selector, and container queries. And you'll notice that most of this is already in Interop 2022 or a proposal for Interop 2023, which is then working as intended. All right, so that's it for state of CSS. Let's zoom in elsewhere on MDN short surveys. So MDN short surveys is a new kind of survey tool or mechanism that's we've worked with Mozilla on. They are surveys that show up inline on relevant pages. So this is a screenshot of the survey that we ran to let developers prioritize, Interop 2023 proposals. So it would show up in the GAP documentation, and you could expand it, and you get this one question survey where you're asked to pick up to 5 options. And we did one survey like this for the features that are like in CSS land, and another one for the proposals that are more about APIs or JavaScript. As I said, we had 87 proposals in total, so we couldn't fit all of them into either of these. I think 39 ended up included in one of them in the end. So the question we asked there, you could see it on the previous slide as well, but bigger text. We asked which features should be improved across browsers in the coming year. So we didn't tell people about Interop 2023 or anything. We just asked, here are a bunch of things, which ones sort of resonate more with you. And here are the results. For the first survey, at the very top of the ranking was media queries range syntax. And for APIs and JavaScript, it was web components. And both of these sort of significantly more often picked than the second choice. The confidence intervals or the error bars on these are less than 4%, so they're not tiny. So some of the order here might change, but we can differentiate between like what the top and the bottom is. And these responses here are the top thirds from each proposal, which I would say means, yes, that's a signal. That's a medium to strong signal that it matters. All right, so that's 2 different kinds of survey data. Let's zoom in on a specific proposal as promised, and it's backdrop filter. So backdrop filter, why is that important? If we take everything together, well, it's already widely used on 16% of pages according to use counter. It was prominent actually already last year in State of CSS and this year again, and was also prominent in the MDN short survey that we did. It was in the top third of those options. And this, what's left to do with backdrop filter is that it still requires a prefix in Safari. I think this is a strong proposal, but I'm biased because I posted it, and it'll be up to the consensus of the Interop team, whether this gets in or not. All right, so if you want to follow along with the process, here's the repo. You can watch that. Or you can just wait until January and wait for a public announcement. That's okay too. We're right in the middle of everything now. So I want to thank everyone who's helped to evaluate all the proposals that we have going. I see Mason's here. He's had a lot of work and pings from us. Thank you, Mason. Everyone else. I also want to thank everyone who's contributed to the past efforts that have made this possible. With that, I think we're open for some questions. All right, let me check the queue so I can. Yes, Rob.
Hey, great presentation. So one thing that keeps coming up when we're talking about these focus areas is like our current ability to test things. How do we make sure that we keep the focus on the issues that are impacting the users and not the things that we currently have the infrastructure to test in WPT?
That's a good question. So one piece of good news is that we have a proposal. So I think the most obvious example of lacking test infrastructure is with mobile testing, right? That is, in fact, a proposal for an investigation effort for next year, which we will, Google that is, will be supporting. Mozilla made that proposal, and I think that's a great idea. So that will mean forming a little group that does whatever it takes to evaluate different CI options for mobile testing, whether it's emulators or real devices, whatever, and then actually getting it to the point where we have results from. Actually, I'm not clear about the exact scope of these, but moving that forward so that sooner or later we're going to have results from Safari iOS, Chrome and Android, Chrome iOS, Firefox Android, and so on WPT FYI. So that is a way that this can help in those kinds of situations. Now, you could, in theory, have a situation that the most wanted feature, if you could name a single one, was one that was very difficult to test. Happily, that isn't the case. But if it were, I think the right approach would be to focus on the infrastructure 1 year and then turn it into a focus area the year after that.
We have an in-person question here.
Okay, so in theory, the goal of research proposals, what was the name of? I'm blanking on right now.
You mean investigation efforts?
Yeah, investigation efforts. The goal of that is ideally to actually have tests for the next version of Interop, right? I know that Interop 2023 is still not closed, but how do the investigation efforts in Interop 2023 measure up to that?
So we haven't, 2023 hasn't started yet, but we can look at some of the proposals.
Like how are the investigation efforts in 2023 measuring up to the goal of potentially ended up in tests for 2023?
I understand the question. So I think maybe the clearest one is one that actually Chris, who I see here, sort of defined. It's about accessibility tree testing. And there, an investigation roadmap was defined where we need to add some WebDriver endpoints to expose some things about. Maybe Chris can explain this, actually. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, the accessibility proposal. So right now you can't actually detect accessibility with the developer API, and that's on purpose because it's important not to have the web experience be different for those using screen readers than other users. But as a result, it's difficult to test it in WPT. So the proposal is to come up with a way to test it in WPT that does not violate that principle. So we would introduce additional APIs that are exposed to the test to the WebDriver that would be able to test the computer role of elements. Ideally, we'd be able to execute screen reader actions of some kind and verify that the browsers interoperably respond to them. And then I'm not sure also if your question was for Interop, for investigation areas in 2022 and how they're maybe graduating to a full proposal in 2023. I think an example of that is maybe, let's see. Well, we did have a viewport one. Do we have a viewport 2023 proposal, Philip?
I'm checking right now. I know we have the pointer events. We have a pointer event proposal for next year, which is based directly on the outcome of the investigation effort this year.
So maybe Rob, you could tell us what happened with that investigation area.
Oh, this is with the pointer and mouse events.
Yes.
We have like a reasonably long list of issues that developers run into, but we don't have tests for all of them. Where we have maybe tests for we've triaged roughly a third of the list, I think, and about half of them have resulted in tests. I don't know what the current stance is on like where that proposal is going, whether it's going forward or not. But regardless, we plan to continue finishing the tests, like whether this ends up being a focus area or not. It seems like a valuable area to be testing.
Got another in person. Got another in person.
Hey, I think you said 87 is a awesome and terrifying number. Maybe not exact those words, but
yes,
it's a lot to focus on. Is there a plan for like a bar in terms of number of focus areas? Any thoughts on that?
Good question. Yes, we didn't know we would be this successful, but we did think we might have too many proposals. So we did actually plan for this. So we've added a second sort of phase to the proposal selection where, so the first step is we all sort of go off on our own when we come up with a yes, no, neutral answer, right? You just put that together and you get the list of things that are included tentatively. What we've added this year is a second step where we look at that and say, okay, do we think this is like reasonable as a set? Are the things that we want to remove because they're sort of too small or they don't fit the theme? It would have made more sense if this other proposal were made it, but it didn't, to drop some things. But also we have the possibility of doing some kind of ranking exercise and dropping things if we all agree to that. But that's the premise, that we can make changes that we all agree to, but if we can't agree, then it'll be the initial set of things. I'm kind of hoping that we don't need to do that prioritization because it feels not great for the people who made the proposals to know that their thing was accepted, but then we cut it not because people didn't want to do it, but just because we wanted to hit some number. But I'm of two minds about this. But we'll just see tomorrow is when we'll see what the number is. That's when we will compare notes.
Got another in person. 1 second.
Hey, Philip, Joey here.
Hey.
I know dialogue is part of Interop 22, and I'm like about to make a bunch of changes to dialogue initial focus. We're just going to change a few of the tests that are tracked in Interop 22. I'm kind of wondering, like, I guess there's a lot of options. Like, should I wait until next year to do it? Should I do it later and then propose the changes for Interop 24? Like, will dialogue be rolled over into Interop 23? I mean, I don't know if this happens a lot with other categories, like the test change, but what do you think?
So we've had a bunch of tests change. Some might have even changed without us noticing it. We don't have a process to require us to approve those changes. Most of the time, test changes are just fine. If you're making changes that are sort of inverting the pass condition, and you know that some browser is going to go from passing to failing those tests, then I think it would be great with a heads up and really to make sure that if this is a WhatWG change, that we have some representative from Gecko and WebKit on board with those changes. Because if we change things without letting people know in the right way, that might be no problem. We haven't had any sort of dust ups yet, but it's a great question, and so I would maybe email me. We have two ways we could do it. We have a old test change proposal that we could use for this, which is mostly used when we add or remove tests so far. But when we have a planned change, we could do that as well to raise awareness of it. I would add, like, if you have small changes that won't, matter much in some sense, then you shouldn't be afraid to make those just because it's in Interop 2022. It's not supposed to be frozen tests. Tests are always, evolving. But there's some bar of, disruptive change that would be great to run by everyone.
Chris, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to that in general, it looks like, there actually is active discussion in the Interop group every week for the past few weeks about the question of what do we do with the prior year's scores? Do we include those in this year? Do we mix it in somehow? How do we do that? And also, like, how do we add more stuff? We're always adding new tests. So in this case, it was a change of behavior, but sometimes it's actually always the case that, like, you find more bugs, you add another test to cover the new case that bug uncovered, et cetera, et cetera. So we do want to add more over time. There's, like, for example, a proposal from Ian to add some more, I think, grid tests, or maybe Flexbox tests, or both.
Both, yeah.
And or both. And everyone's like, yes, we should, because the whole point of Interop is to, over time, increasingly and systematically and gradually improve Interop across the web. So hopefully we will have consensus that will carry everything over, and then, like, always collectively improve everything over time. But these, like, when we know that there's a jump, like, it does make sense to make people aware in advance, and when possible, agree on it.
All right, you want to wrap up, Philip?
Right. I don't have any final words of wisdom, except thanks everyone for attending and for the questions. If you have more questions, you know where to find me, Philip at. And yeah, if you work for Google or one of the organizations who are part of this, and you want to sort of have a look at how the sausage is made, you can also have a look at our positions. They won't be public for a while yet, because we don't want to have the half-made decision made public before we get to at least phase 2 that I mentioned. But yeah, if you're curious about what's going on, I can give you more detail.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.